Introducing yourself. I'm sure most people are familiar with who you are,
Sure.
but tell us a little bit about you and your background and your career.
Well, I'm Chuck Daellenbach, and I'm the tuba player of Canadian Brass. And I'm also one of the original members, starting out in 1970. Our mission at that time was to take music that we loved and try to build an audience that might eventually agree with us. There was no path laid out when we started, so we had quite an interesting um, opportunity. The world will never be quite like that again, so it's kind of fun to reflect back. On the one hand, it's fun to reflect back and just think of it as a fascinating journey. On the other, it's not necessarily indicative of a path for young players because
Sure.
so much has changed in the meantime. So, in a way, a lot of the observations that I can make about music um, can be useful in their intent, not necessarily specific directions, but the concepts uh, remain pretty true. So we can talk about that.
Sure. So this is something that I've always wondered, and I've I tried to watch all the interviews of you I could, and I couldn't. I never saw. I've never heard this story, and maybe you've shared it before. But can you I know, you met Gene Watts and you guys kind of started, tossing around this idea, I guess. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure. And so, what was like the first gig the Canadian Brass ever did? What was it and what was it like?
The first things that we did were children's shows. We were part of a organization at that time called Prologue to the Arts.
Okay.
There was Prelude to the Arts, which was Toronto based, and it used Toronto symphony musicians to go into the schools. That was Prelude. Prologue was to have musicians going all over the province of Ontario. And of course, the reason they were different is that the Toronto musicians, following the normal inclination of symphony orchestra musicians, weren't too interested in traveling
Sure.
beyond the concert hall. So it was a great opportunity for us to travel out and do a lot of concerts. Now, Gene had been in the Toronto Symphony and knew these people very well, the organization. So he actually created a group. And this would have been the late 60s. Created a group to do the prologues. But at that time, there was no tuba player in Toronto suitable for such a group. So they went out as a quartet. And Gene would drag along his baritone so that they could, have a kind of a bass sound for certain things. And
Sure.
quite an interesting show. I think they played the Gunther Schuller Quartet in amongst popular things. It was quite a nice show for kids. And then when I did meet Gene, we found we shared a lot of similar interests. For one thing, we had the same teacher in the background. We had both been Arnold Jacobs students at one time or another. So we had a lot to talk about just in that light. And then the fact that he had been taking groups around at that time around this area. And of course, when I was in college, we had the Young Artists organization in the United States. Um, Again, playing school concerts, and for me, that was in the Rochester area because I was at the some music school in Rochester, and we went out and played schools. So again, we had similar experiences that we could share, and then based on that, we found that we had very compatible, very different skills, but very compatible in the sense that they augmented each other. So it turned out to be a relationship quite unusual in the music world. You tend to find it more in the theatrical world, Laurel and Hardy or Abbott and Costello, or things
Sure.
like that.
Now,
I mean,
can you elaborate a little bit on what those skills were? Like, what was his skills versus yours, and how did they kind of work together?
Gene was a very unusual musician, not only for that time but for this time. He looked at concerts as a shared experience.
Sure.
He looked at it as what could we do that would relate to an audience, and how could we be sensitive to an audience's reactions, needs, interests, responses to what we were doing, and really changed around the idea, which was prevalent at that time. And we all know musicians of this nature, a violinist that might be very well trained, maybe won a few contests, goes out and plays a Bach chaconne, and the audience doesn't understand what he's doing. And then you'll hear the performer say, "That was really a dumb audience. They just didn't understand what I'm doing."
Right. Sure.
And, I guess that's fine if you have a built-in audience that's going to be looking for violinists, but no one was looking for a brass group at that time.
Totally.
So we knew we had to do something that was interesting to an audience and be sensitive to that. So from the very beginning, we were sharing that relationship. We would actually ask audiences questions when we play. We'd get them involved. Now it seems very normal. At the time, it was quite heretical to have a music group appear. And basically, we were playing chamber music concerts.
Sure.
Normally populated by string quartets and the like. So we had an audience that was fairly unfamiliar with brass and certainly unfamiliar with the music. And we were there really on a mission. And the mission was twofold. One is to create a really excellent audience, and the other was to develop a pathway for ourselves to try to build a career. So you're not necessarily thinking about all that at the time, but you realize that that's, when you put it back together,
right,
we were climbing small hills to see what the next hills might hold.
Sure.
And we were very fortunate at that time. We had places to experiment. One was we were the resident brass of Hamilton Philharmonic. Hamilton is a large town, 500,000 people outside of Toronto, half an hour away from Toronto. Hamilton at that time was the world's finest community orchestra. And their mission was to take music to all of the school children in a 50-mile radius of Hamilton, where every child would hear a string group, a brass group, a woodwind group, a percussion group every year in their school, and then come into the main hall and hear an orchestra concert. And we were the tip of the wedge to get into the schools. We went in and did the school shows that everyone found very interesting and very exciting, which made it possible for this Hamilton Orchestra to operate this program. As a sidelight, the program fell apart, maybe 5-6 years later, because musicians, as they like to do, they really didn't want to get out of those chairs at the concert hall. So they really degraded the school shows so that they could become an orchestra. Well, they did. The Hamilton Philharmonic became a professional orchestra, and within 2 years it went bankrupt.
Right.
So from the world's finest community orchestra to a bankrupt professional orchestra. And it really kind of showed the strength of what we were doing, really going out into the community. I often like to tell people that we were the only musicians, historically, that thought they could find their way to Carnegie Hall by playing children's shows.
Sure.
That was our laboratory. That was a fantastic laboratory. So we didn't look at it. Most musicians thought, well, maybe I can make a couple extra dollars every week. Maybe,
right.
Maybe I can get them to stop making me do this. And we looked at it the opposite. What an opportunity to play repertoire over and over again and to refine the performance and also find out what's working and what isn't working. Because children are very, very fast critics. You don't have to wait even to the next day to read a critic or the next year to see that people don't come back to a concert. Children will tell you right away. So we found that very useful in our development.
Right, like a rapid feedback loop in a way.
Absolutely. And consequently, that really held us in good stead forever. To this day, there's things that we learn from playing those kinds of concerts. So that was our beginning, and our first major concert was at the end of the first year of really intense rehearsals. The CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, had a summer festival, and one of the concerts was Canadian Brass, and it was our premier concert, which was recorded. Our concerts, we've been recorded every year of our existence. So the very first concert was
Wow.
recorded. The music is still available. So
Is that online anywhere? That'd be super interesting to check out.
it's been blended into some other things, some best of recordings and so forth.
Wow. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Well, that was the other thing that by being a group starting in Canada, two things were really important about that. One was from a colleague standpoint, we didn't have musicians in our audience. Canada, we were on the ground floor of an opportunity. There just wasn't the population concentration of musicians, even knowing what a brass quintet might be, for example.
Sure.
So we didn't have the peer group pressure of playing for other musicians. One of the biggest threats to a young musician is other musicians telling them what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Because it can be
For
very.
sure.
It might be interesting. You have to play this music, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you find out, well, that's great from a musician standpoint, but it doesn't hold with the audience.
Totally.
So we didn't have musicians in the audience. We were playing for real people right from the start, and we were playing for the same people over and over again. And by being part of this Hamilton project, we would play a library circuit, for example. We'd play all the libraries in the area, and we'd do a series. So we'd be playing for the same audience 3 and 4 times
Sure.
a season.
Now, can I ask a question there, Chuck? I didn't mean to interrupt. So were all of these, and if you don't mind me asking, paid gigs, or were some of these you were doing for free for the experience, the exposure, just to practice and get it? I mean, just for the sake of people understanding the context of all of these.
Sure. Well, that was the other unique thing at that time, and Gene had been out 10 years before me, is that money was the fruit of the labor. We were planting trees.
Sure.
Fruit on it, we were really lucky. The children's shows cumulatively paid very well, but it was cumulative. We did 300, 400 children's shows a year.
Wow.
That's hard labor. That's heavy lifting.
That's more than one a day on some days.
But the nice part was the Hamilton paid us based on our work done, not on our chair position. You know, the tuba player isn't usually the best paid player in an orchestra. That was one of the other things that made the oboe player and the clarinet player and string quartet kind of unhappy in that orchestra situation when it was a community orchestra, is that we were paid based on what we were doing. And because our children's show was very successful and our community concerts were very successful, we worked a lot. And we were paid on that basis. So it changed the kind of pay, what are these things worth, kind of turned that upside down. And that's why earlier I mentioned the orchestra went bankrupt later, is that they did instill an orchestra concept, and the concertmaster is the best paid, and the oboe player is next, and
right
stuff. And that worked for about a year.
Sure.
Yeah. But we never looked at payment as a must. We didn't turn things down because it didn't pay or it didn't pay well enough and so forth. We really always looked at things as a two-way street. We wanted to find out what people needed or what they wanted. CBC, for example, we'd go in and sit down with the producers and say, what are you working on? And they'd say, well, I've been really thinking about the Bach Art of the Fugue. They'd say, Art of the Fugue, we love the Art of the Fugue. Next thing you know, we have an Art of the Fugue project.
Right.
That sort of thing. So it was really always searching out what people were thinking about, what they were interested in, and how we could fit in
sure
their scheme as well.
Totally. Now, one other question. I know we don't have I know we don't have a ton of time, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process in recruitment. So, like, you need a new member. So, can you talk a little bit about maybe where you look, but also some of the factors that are considered that have nothing to do with their playing, and how maybe important versus not important that is for you?
Sure. Well, I would have a feeling that maybe it's half and half regarding performance quality and personality, or their willingness to jump in. Five is a very dynamic number. If five people can be on the same wavelength, it seems like anything is possible.
Sure.
But you need people on the same wavelength. Lifestyle becomes very important when you have any kind of a group that lives together so much as we do. As a sidelight, that might be one of the problems orchestra faces today. It's hard for them to come up with innovative projects and things that will really attract audiences, so forth, because people are selected quite anonymously. They might fit together, they might not. In our group, it's very important that the fit, that people share the same vision and the same passion. So that's what we're looking for: is someone that's willing to throw in and become part of the texture, part of the family. We don't really have a leader, but we don't really have followers. It's a group of five people that really are able to do pretty much anything they want, as long as they can get at least one other person on side. You have an argument. We found early on that if somebody holds a position that and cannot get at least one other person to agree, it's probably a good idea to leave that idea behind. But if you can get at least one other person to agree, well, then you've got something to work on, and you can really work that situation out. Similarly, we found if there's one person that's really against something, it's really hard to ultimately make it work. Like if you have a piece of music that everyone seems to like, and one person says, "I hate that piece. I really, really hate it," you really have a problem forcing that issue. You have to be kind of tuned into the same. And you can play along, but that's not the ultimate plan. You need everybody kind of pulling in the same direction. So when we were looking for replacements, and mind you, this didn't come up much. Our first horn player left after 13 years. Usually that's a whole career. So 13 years in, we were looking for a horn player, and there was a fine player out in Vancouver that we knew very well. And we brought him into the group, Marty Hackelman.
Mm-hmm.
And Marty played with us for 3 years, and then he wanted to go off and develop a solo career and one thing and another. And then David Ohanian joined the group. And again, another 13-year run. So these are long, really long runs. Later, just because of age, when you start out and you're in your 20s, you're not really thinking about the other side of it. But really, the last 10 years, from my point of view, has been, in a sense, establishing the group that can carry on the mission.
Sure.
And that's been a lot of trials, and in the process, we've had some really great players. That's why I called it the Trumpet Dream Team at one point, because these are amazing trumpet players that, for one reason or another, couldn't make that commitment. Very often it's family, it's travel, something like that.
Of course.
The others of us, we grew up with it. Like, to me, travel, I don't really think of it as, now I have to think about the travel. Is this too much or is it too little? It's just always been a part of the function. There was a flute player, Paul Horn, some years ago said, people often ask him, isn't it a terrible life, traveling and being away from home? He says, yeah, it's really tough. I have to go to these cities like Paris and London and Munich and Tokyo. Oh man, that's hard. And you have to play in these concert halls like Carnegie and Chicago Orchestra Hall. Yeah, it's a tough life. So that's the other side of it, because the thrill of the result makes anything possible. So it always weighs out nicely.
Sure. And so one last thing that I'd love to get your kind of thoughts on, and I think you definitely have an interesting perspective on this, but if you were starting out right now, based on your knowledge of the industry and what works and what doesn't, what are some things that you would do if you were just finishing, let's say you finished your master's and you were living in like New York City? Like, what are some of the first things that you would do having the kind of knowledge and understanding of the industry that you have now?
Well, first, I probably wouldn't live in New York. That'd be so expensive.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, I think we're always at that stage. It looks like somebody or some group is successful, and now all those worries and thoughts are gone. It's a constant. It's a continuum. It never really changes. If someone wants to go out of business, all they have to do is decide they're successful and they've made it. We're doing the very things that any young group would do. Sorry about that.
You're fine.
Trumpet player Chris Coletti, for example, and you mentioned media earlier, he's really becoming an expert in the so-called social media area. He's researching how you can put all of the elements together to really display the kind of things we're doing. And I think this past summer was a good example of his work. We played some of the most beautiful concert halls, one after another, in this summer festival. Now, usually that's a kind of a personal experience, and we come home and tell our families what wonderful halls we had. He was actually taking videos, live videos, streaming, doing the Facebook, Twitter, all of those things, combining them. And in a sense, it's marketing. It's everything that one should be thinking about and learning in school, after school. We're doing the very same things that any group would do. Now, granted, we have a bonus in that we're a brand. Canadian Brass is now a brand after all these years. So that does always give us a head start. There's no question about that. But underneath that, we're doing exactly the same things that any young group would be doing: the recording, the opportunities to play radio shows, going into communities, meeting people, making sure that they recognize or feel that we're really happy to be there, and we really want to be there, and we're really there to serve this community function as well as a musical function, and to make it known. The emphasis on electronic media has changed everything once again, and I think we're very sensitive to that and realize that it can't go unnoticed. It has to be part of the process. So in that sense, although it looks like these are things we maybe wouldn't have to do, we have decided, and especially the younger players in the group, if they want to make the next 40-year run, this is very much on their mind, and we are taking it on headlong. So in that sense, nothing has really changed in the approach to the musical community. What we're seeing around us is that the traditional avenues have started to be less important.
Sure.
Well,
of course.
There was a moment in history when Columbia Artists Management had 7 brass groups on their roster. And people would call in and they'd say, well, how much money do you have? Oh, great. Well, then you can get Canadian Brass. Oh, you only have that? Well, then you can get this group. Oh, you only have that. Well, then we have a group for you.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think at this point, Columbia Artists probably has no groups. There might still be one on their roster, but that all changed, and the managements themselves changed. All those beautiful 57th Street managements are gone.
Right.
So that's
for sure.
The thing. The concert scene has changed dramatically. It used to be that, well, let's take an example like Interlaken. We went to Interlaken for 12 years in a row. And somebody on their board, or somehow they decided that they should expand into more of a popular kind of offering. And now I think they run 7 nights a week doing pop. It's a shed. It's a pop,
sure.
rock and roll. It's a shed. So, everybody starts to look at their bottom lines and it starts to change. And we're right in there competing now with pop attractions, attractions rather than concerts. And they even have a name for it, what we've always called concert halls. They now call that the soft seat sales. So they have sheds, they have arenas, and they have soft seat. So they're zeroing in, they being the popular world, are zeroing in on our traditional concert halls. We're right in there elbow to elbow with
Sure, absolutely.
So that's made it, again, and I think that's one of the reasons, like this plethora of brass groups at one point, that's all changed. the recording industry is well known. I mean, everybody can read about the recording industry.
Of course.
I think we're probably the only brass group on earth. We're still able to do 2 projects a year, but it's because we created our own recording company.
Right.
We have about 17 artists. I think we counted up 17 artists on our little label. And Canadian Brass, of course, the leader of the label. But our intention is to keep that alive because people want the recorded sound. Now, the way it's delivered, it used to be, you could sell several 100,000 recordings out to people, and those stores don't exist. But the listeners are still there. The people are still there, and the want, the need, and so forth for music. And we were very excited, actually very happy about this media change because we now have, and this is one of the things Chris and our group has discovered from doing the analytics on all of the electronics.
Yeah, great.
Some of our strongest fan bases are places we have actually not toured or toured very little. For example, Argentina and Brazil. We've played 1 concert in Brazil so far. We've been mostly concentrated over the equator. Italy, Spain, France, very strong listenership. We've played very little, played a lot in northern Italy, and we've done a couple tours of Italy, but over the span of time, nothing like the fan base that's developed.
Right, of course.
Venezuela, an unbelievable following down there. There's such a huge thing going with El Sistema with the brass players. Huge following there. Again, we've only been in Venezuela once.
Right.
So this is what the internet has done for a group like us. Is it's
Absolutely.
given us a worldwide base the opportunity to actually hear what we do, not just hear about us, but to actually tune in, see the videos, listen to the music, and become really strong fans. So we welcome. I think there was only a small period of time where musicians got all excited about making a lot of money. I think it was about 10 years in the 90s or something. But we remember back in the 70s when we would put LPs in the back of our car as we're driving out to Ontario, and our intention was we hoped to sell enough LPs to break even, knowing that people would take those LPs home and they would put it someplace and every now and then see a picture. It's like planting a poster of the group in somebody's house.
Right.
We were quite happy to do that for the PR value. And I think we're kind of getting back to that now. And musicians really can't focus on the idea that, hey, I'm going to make a lot of money doing this. Well, if you're lucky, maybe you would. But the real principle of this is to get the music out to listeners. And any way that it's possible to do that is worth trying.
Sure.
So.
Cool. Well, Chuck, we'll do a little wrap up here after I hit the stop button here. But I really appreciate taking the time here, and I'm sure all the folks on the email list and the readers and everybody that stumbles across this website will get a lot of value for that. So thanks so much for taking time, and let me just hit stop here.